What's good, Modern Retro Show family? It's Teacher Eddie and Jacob back again. So we got a brand new video from Simple History, just came out yesterday, and it's about a topic that you guys were actually asking me to cover, so hey, perfect timing. So Agent Orange, we're going to learn about Agent Orange today. Jacob's excited because he always wants to learn something new. So let's get right into it.
Agent Orange, Operation Ranch Hand, 1962 to 1971, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was one of the...
Yeah, that's what the operation was called. It was called Operation Ranch Hand. It was actually started first by President John F. Kennedy, and it lasted for almost a decade. So the operation was basically to spray chemical agents over the jungle. Agent Orange is, of course, the most famous of them all, and there were different degrees depending on the potency, like Agent Orange 1, 2, 3, 4, but there was also Agent Blue, Agent White. It was kind of like a Reservoir Dogs. Your name is Mr. Pink. Mr. Pink, why do I gotta be Mr. Pink? What about you? I'm Mr. Brown. You might as well call me Mr. Crap. What about you? You got a cool name. You're Mr. White. You're Mr. Pink, okay? That's it. Stop yammering like a bunch of broads. So basically the whole point was to destroy the jungles, right? Which I'm sure they're going to get into why that was important. But the operation was called Operation Ranch Hand.
The toughest challenges that the United States Armed Forces had experienced in its history. They faced an enemy that fought in an unconventional manner. Even though the Americans and their allies, the South Vietnamese, had superiority in the amount and quality of weaponry, their enemies had other completely different advantages. The Vietnam War was fought almost completely in jungle terrain, which the American soldiers were not adapted to.
Yep.
The thick jungle prevented the use of armored units, aggravated logistics, and limited the use of the Air Force as support. All of these difficulties held back the U.S. forces from exploiting their fighting potential to its full extent. On the opposite side, soldiers of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army used all the jungle's features to their advantage. The density of foliage and bushes provided unlimited possibilities for guerrilla.
Yeah, they use a lot of these different types of traps. And
that one is, I think they put poison on that.
sometimes they did. They would use poison tipped spears as well. But at the end of the day, they basically had home court advantage, really. Like you hear that in sports, right? Why is that important? Because they know their terrain much better than any foreign enemy would, right? Because that's their home, right? That's their home court. So they had the advantage. And America was flying high, of course, after World War II, especially with, just victory after victory and becoming the superpower after World War II. Which America was not prior to World War II. Our military was nowhere near the might it became after the Second World War. And they thought they were going to wipe out Vietnam like nothing, right? They thought they were going to blitz right through it, but then it becomes one of the longest wars in American history. And the reason it drags on so long is because you could have all the technology in the world, but when you're fighting guerrilla warfare, right, which is popularized in the 60s, and you're not equipped for that, and also the tenacity and the willingness to die for their cause. They were going up against an enemy the likes of which they had never faced before, similar to the Pacific Campaign in World War II, which is why it was so brutal and it just dragged on and on and on, is because our American boys and the other allies just weren't used to this type of jungle terrain warfare.
In the jungle, the VC and NVA could go into hiding, prepare ambushes, and set up booby traps, but also allowed them to approach the American bases unnoticed, therefore holding their enemies in a constant state of increased awareness. Undoubtedly, the jungle terrain was a tremendous obstacle for the Americans in fighting the war. For that reason, they fought it by all means possible. The best, but also the most controversial weapon in their arsenal were chemical defoliants, such as Agent Orange.
Guys, I became debt-free driving for DoorDash, and it's been great. I'm my own boss, and I'm in control.
Again, I know, because a lot of people ask sometimes, like, why don't you just get YouTube Premium? So like I said, I can't use it with the software that I utilize. Also, I don't like to edit these videos, so people later don't accuse me of somehow preparing for these videos or somehow doctoring these videos to show that I'm smarter than whatever. I'm smart. What can I say? I know a lot of people are shocked based on my personality that I actually have a brain, right? But here's the other quick point I want to make about chemical warfare and the usage in Vietnam. So this is nothing new. So chemical warfare, if you watched my reaction to oversimplified World War II, I mentioned that Winston Churchill, who was a huge proponent of chemical warfare, the use of atomic energy, even before the Second World War starts, had stated, if German forces ever land on British soil, we are going to protect our home front by any means necessary. And he had authorized the use of chemical and biological weapons. Yeah.
I just want to say another reason why it wasn't new was because of World War One. They used
mustard gas. Yeah. So, but this specific type of herbicide warfare. So eventually, after the war ends, England does end up using this for the first time in the 1950s in Malaysia. And it actually worked out very well for them. But it's not going to work out as well for the Americans here.
The experience of the British Army in crushing the Malayan uprising was of great help to the South Vietnamese in the early stages of the war. One technique passed on by the British was the process of jungle defoliation. By doing this, the British deprived insurgents of a natural hideout, an idea that could have worked in Vietnam as well. Unable to conduct such an operation by themselves, the South Vietnamese asked the United States for help. On November 30th, 1961, President John F. Kennedy approved the use of herbicides in Vietnam. Operation Ranch Hand had begun.
So here's a huge, one of the biggest questions I get from students all the time is a lot about stuff of what if Kennedy wasn't assassinated? And the big one is, what would have happened in Vietnam if Kennedy was not assassinated in November of 1963, on the 22nd of November? Anything, of course, is theory. But the theory that is perpetuated, and a lot of it is because of Oliver Stone's JFK, which is a great work of dramatization, but loose based on history is not even giving it, enough due. It is extremely loose. But the perpetuated myth is, if Kennedy would have lived, we would have never gotten involved in Vietnam, which is absolutely untrue. The only thing I could say based on the trajectory of JFK's decision-making is, number one, he is sending advisors. He's also sending in special forces. He's sending in troops. But in the summer of '63, there's a lot of protests, especially by Buddhists. It was called the Buddhist crisis, where the Buddhists were saying that the North Vietnamese were basically trying to purge them out of Vietnam, and so they were fighting for their religious freedom. And there was a famous, of course, photograph that circulates in late '63 of a monk setting himself on fire, right, in the middle of the street as a form of protest. Later on in the 60s, there would be multiple cases of this, even in the United States itself, of these monks setting themselves on fire, literally burning alive in the street. Kennedy sees this image, and to him, this is just absolutely terrifying and heartbreaking. So his concern was not as much as the flow of communism and the spread of communism, as much as just a complete regime change, right? So that's why it was important for him to go in and overthrow the regime. Yeah, you can go get that, please. So the importance of this is that Kennedy would have sent additional troops into Vietnam. There's no doubt about it. Would he have escalated it to the point that Lyndon Johnson eventually escalates it to? I absolutely do not think so. I think there would have been some medium. And of course, with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which maybe they'll mention, which really fortifies and escalates our involvement in Vietnam, I'm sure Kennedy would have handled that differently as well. But to say that we would have not gotten involved in Vietnam at all is a complete falsehood, in my opinion.
The operation had two primary objectives: to deny the enemy from using thick jungle vegetation as cover, and to deny them access to food crops. After conducting effective defoliation experiments, 6 Fairchild C-123 Provider aircraft, adapted for the spraying of chemical agents, landed on January 7, 1962, at the Tan Son Nhut Air Base in South Vietnam. 6 days later, they started operational missions. The operation that started in 1962 lasted for 9 years. The average sortie comprised 3 to 5 C-123s flying in formation, each spraying an area of land 260 feet or 80 meters wide and 10 miles or 16 kilometers long. For this task, the Fairchild C-123 Provider aircraft were fitted with tanks inside the fuselage and spray nozzles on the wings. In the beginning, operations were limited to the jungle along the major highway north of Saigon, mangrove forests near the coast, and rice farms in the Mekong Delta. The purpose of the task was to deny the insurgents cover for ambushes and using mangroves as building material and food. The number of sorties increased over time, as did the area of operation.
Yeah, so again, as much as it was to destroy the foliage, to destroy the jungle, the other point was, of course, to also destroy food supplies. So that was an important point as well.
Also, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Dang.
The real increase occurred after the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the more active role of the United States in the war.
There we go.
A detachment of aircraft were deployed to Da Nang Air Base to operate against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. From 1966, Da Nang became the main base for spraying.
Okay, so they're not going to explain the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident is the turning point in America's full-on involvement in Vietnam. So we were involved in Vietnam going back even to Eisenhower. But mainly that was just sending delegates out there, or advisors as they call them, because the fear was the spread of communism, right? Because now we're in the era of the Cold War. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident takes place in 1964. Yeah, the year after Kennedy's assassinated. I don't remember what time in 64. So basically, there were 2 attacks. So the first attack was by the Vietnamese against American naval vessels. And there was a skirmish, but it wasn't anything like, major,
like
right?
Bismarck in the Hood?
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah,
I mean, it was like a fender bender at best, right? But what really fuels things is 2 or 3 days later, it's reported that our boys are attacked again by Vietnamese submarines and naval vessels, and we start firing back missiles, and then Lyndon Johnson and his cabinet present to Congress the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And that's when Congress authorizes the use of force. I mean, major force. This is really when the war starts. And the issue is, there was no second attack. The second attack, there's no real evidence to say that it was faked, but there's complete evidence to say it didn't happen. Faked, I mean that it was purposefully faked to incite the war. But Robert S. McNamara himself stated there was no evidence of an attack. I mean, basically the entire cabinet eventually comes out and says it didn't happen. That some theories were that there were just spooks on the sonar that looked like But even the naval vessels in their report said there were no Vietnamese carrier submarines, nothing in the area. The funniest explanation is that the sonar actually picked up whale farts.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you heard that one. That's another popular one. Again, it's not 100%, but that's one of the theories out there. So whale farts could be blamed for the start of Vietnam. But there was no second attack. That is not even debated. And that, unfortunately, starts what will become a prolonged, bloody, and costly war that the United States eventually loses. And probably the most unpopular war we ever had.
Operations. By the end of the operation, 4 more air bases were added to the list. From 1965, the number of sorties rose exponentially. The highest number of sorties conducted in 1968 were around 5,700 missions, spraying over 5 million gallons, or well over 19 million liters of herbicides on an area of about 7,900 square miles, or 20,000 square kilometers. 95% of all spraying missions were conducted by Fairchild C-123s of the 309th Spray Flight, which later changed its name to the 12th Air Commando Squadron. Flying a spraying mission was a perilous job. In order to make an accurate spray of herbicides on designated areas, planes had to fly very low, about 150 feet above the ground. They also had to fly at a slow speed of 130 miles per hour on a straight and level flight path. Not only was it a challenging task, but it made the aircraft highly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, that's what they actually looked like?
What, the planes?
Yeah, the air.
Yeah.
That looks perfect to blend in with the form.
Well, the problem is they're flying so low, they're flying so slow, and again, they're flying in a straight path. I mean, it's like a duck shoot at that point.
To enemy anti-aircraft fire from the ground. The most challenging missions were in War Zone D, where the confined space and small target areas forced pilots to engage in dive bombing maneuvers. Besides, Fairchild
I believe those are Bell helicopters.
C-123s, modified Bell UH-1 helicopters also performed air spraying tasks. On the ground, herbicides were sprayed from trucks and hand sprayers, especially around U.S. military bases. There were several herbicide agents.
So here's another important point here. So number one, it wasn't like these 55-gallon drums of Agent Orange or Agent Blue, Agent White, whatever it was, were just shipped in ready to use. So here's another problem, is that these herbicides not only affected the Vietnamese, but also affected our boys, our soldiers.
Our boys.
So the sad fact is, number one, it was our boys over there who had to mix all this crap together. That's number one. And number two, aside from having to deliver it from the air, they would also spray it on the ground. And our glorious government, and of course, always taking care of our soldiers, had basically told them, hey guys, nothing to worry about. This stuff ain't toxic. Go ahead, spray it all around. Bathe yourself in it if you want. I mean, they didn't say to bathe yourself in it, but that basically they said there is no issue whatsoever. So the issue with Agent Orange specifically is it lasts in your body for decades. And the more exposure you have to it, the worse the symptoms are. I mean, even short-term exposure, while it won't be deadly, will have massive health effects. But if you have prolonged exposure to it, we're talking about neurological issues, we're talking about cancers, we're talking about the fact it stays in your body and your, DNA. You pass it on to your kids. So a lot of children were born with defects, with cancers. I mean, it ravaged the Vietnamese. But also when our soldiers came back home, they started suffering the effects of exposure to Agent Orange. And I guess I don't want to spend too much time here, but later on, I'll tell you a couple of stories of what eventually starts to happen when our boys go to our government and say, hey guys, you messed us up, and how they get treated, right? Spoiler alert, how did the first responders of 9/11 get treated?
I like how you say "da boys."
Because they're our boys. They're over there. You know, whether the war was just or fair, they went. You know, no questions asked to serve.
Around U.S. military bases. There were several herbicide agents that the military used for its missions. The herbicide known as Agent Blue was used for missions against rice farms. For defoliation missions, Agent Green, Agent Pink, and Agent Purple were used until 1966, after which they were replaced with the more effective Agent Orange and, to a lesser extent, Agent White. Without a doubt, Agent Orange was the most exploited herbicide of the ranch hand operation. Agent Orange was a 50-50 mixture of two herbicides, 2,4,5-trichlorophenoxyacetic acid and 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. Both herbicides were experimented with during World War II by the United States Department of the Army and were planned to be used against Japan. When applied, Agent Orange caused the drying of foliage. After spraying, the foliage dropped completely after 3 to 8 weeks, after which it would not grow for the next 4 to 6 months. Agent Orange, being oil-soluble, was effective during rainy seasons as it couldn't be washed away. Herbicides similar to Agent Orange were used in farming, but in Vietnam the concentration used in defoliation missions was 13 to 55 times higher. What made Agent Orange extremely dangerous was its byproduct, 2,3,7,8-tetrachloro-dibenzo-P-dioxin, or TCDD, the most toxic compound of all dioxins.
Yeah. So I guess this is a let me just go into a couple of stories of what happens to our men and women who served over there and come back. So in the early 1980s, which is when, you know, a lot of the people who served in Vietnam, they start exhibiting effects of Agent Orange almost as soon as they get home, of course. But in the 80s, there was a class action lawsuit against the chemical companies that produced, all these different agents, right? All the ingredients. And, because they originally went to the government and said, look, we're sick and we deserve, compensation, whether it's disability or whatever it may be. And the government says, well, prove it, right? So they get together, I forget how many, it was a lot of veterans. I think it was in the millions. They get together and they sue these chemical companies. And after several years, of course, it's a lawsuit. They do end up winning, and they win a pretty hefty sum. I think it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and they get like over $200 million. But again, we're talking about, a couple of million soldiers. And of course, the lawyers take their third. There was also in the 90s, George Bush the First, George Bush 41. He does sign into law the Agent Orange bill, which does basically say that, the United States does recognize any effects of Agent Orange are considered like wartime injuries, so to speak. And even in the 2000s here in Brooklyn, where we live in Brooklyn, New York, I remember there were a bunch of Vietnamese citizens who came over from Vietnam to the United States. They tried to sue the chemical agencies as well, but then a Brooklyn judge ended up throwing it out. I don't remember exactly why, but like I said, it's had lasting effects.
TCDD had a high impact on human health, causing a series of health problems such as cancer, birth defects, and other disabilities. It was exactly these issues that ultimately ended Operation Ranch Hand. Of a great significance was a study by the United States National Cancer Institute that indicated serious health problems caused by Agent Orange. The public disapproval of using herbicides and fund cutting forced the Army to stop using Agent Orange in mid-1970. On January 7, 1971, the last mission of Operation Ranch Hand was carried out. During 9 years of the Ranch Hand operation, nearly 20 million gallons of agents were sprayed on 30,000 square miles, or 77,000 square kilometers of forests and agricultural land. Of that, over 60% were treated with Agent Orange. It was estimated that around 20% of the jungle in South Vietnam was sprayed at least once with Agent Orange. The military assessed the results of the operation as highly positive, reporting that the horizontal visibility increased up to 70%, and vertical visibility by as much as 90%. It was a result of great importance for the safety of American soldiers and the effectiveness of their operations in the field. In real terms, the operation wasn't as effective as the numbers showed. Vast areas of jungle had been defoliated as well as tons of rice crops, but the Viet Cong would always find new hiding places, sources of food, and material for rebuilding their infrastructure. Regardless of its actual military effectiveness, Agent Orange has definitely left an enormous mark on Vietnam. The trace left on the ecosystem was huge, even though dioxin has a low half-life in the soil of between 3 to 5 years. Only in the late 1980s did the environment show significant signs of revitalization after the systematic reforestation campaigns. The most tragic consequence of Agent Orange and other herbicides were its effects on humans, which has been documented by several studies. According to Vietnamese documents, the exposure to dioxin because of Agent Orange spraying has caused health problems for an estimated 3 million Vietnamese citizens, of which 400,000 either died or ended up with serious disabilities.
That's what I'm saying. Whatever, again, they're always going to fudge the facts, and statistics can always be fudged in whatever direction you want to fudge them into. It's just what statistics do you want to show and which ones do you want to hide, right? But at the end of the day, the success of Agent Orange was really embellished, and whatever success there was not worth the cost of human life, whether it was Vietnamese or whether it was our Americans over there fighting. It wasn't worth it at all. It devastated generations, not even those who were affected immediately, but all of the children born thereafter who were affected.
Especially striking was the fact that about 500,000 children were born with birth defects in the years after Operation Ranch Hand had finished. With a half-life of up to 20 years inside the human body, there's a firm belief that dioxin also induced genetic defects among the population in areas most affected by Agent Orange spraying. Apart from the Vietnamese, Agent Orange has caused serious health problems for Americans and South Korean veterans. During the war, soldiers employed on jobs of handling and mixing agents for missions, and those who fought in areas with treated defoliants were assured that there was absolutely no threat to their health.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wasn't sure if because they didn't mention it when they first showed this specific animation, so that's why I wanted to mention it, because it is so important. But great job in mentioning this, because this doesn't get talked about that much.
On their return home, veterans suffered from health problems and had children born with birth defects. They pinpointed it to their exposure to Agent Orange. Regardless of the authenticity of numbers and the accuracy of reports, 9 years of intensive spraying with herbicides such as Agent Orange has left a devastating mark on the people and land of Vietnam. Yet another tragic story of the Vietnam War.
Tragic indeed. Very tragic. And I've spoken to a lot of veterans. When I was doing my graduate work, one of the things was getting oral histories from primary sources. So I spoke to all types of veterans. I even spoke to a veteran who was involved with the USS Indianapolis, which was absolutely fascinating. The horrors, I mean, it was just so visceral. But I spoke to many Vietnam veterans who pretty much everybody knew, not just somebody, but dozens of their brothers who ended up dying due to exposure to Agent Orange. Some of them even had hats that said sprayed and betrayed, right? Because, you know, they were sprayed and betrayed. Because again, the government told them that, hey, no, it's nothing wrong with this stuff. Hey, if you want, you could drink it. That's how good it is.
No, they didn't say that.
I know they didn't say that, but again, they just didn't say how dangerous it was. They said it was non-toxic at all. So again, this is one of those just parts of history that are just absolutely tragic and shouldn't be forgotten.
So, I think on all the things of war we did, I cried and had to leave on so far. And this is the only one I haven't.
So what are you trying to say?
This is a new world record!
Oh my God. Hooray for Agent Orange?
No, for me.
Anyway, check out one of our other videos. Check out a playlist here. Check out some of our other stuff. Support your boys. Support us so we can keep on doing this. We're working not even overtime. We're working overtime. And as always, we're going to shout out the Hall of Fame Patrons. You want to support the show, check us out, patreon.com/Modern Retro Show.
James.
Spacey Doodle.
Elena.
Ulrike.
Clement.
Vijandra.
Alan.
Alex.
Mama.
Aaron Shepard.
Big
Dallas Eager.
Freeman.
And we will see you
next time.